Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Lisa. Today, I have a very special guest, like all my guests. Today, I've got Richard Morris on, and Richard is an international Zig Ziglar legacy speaker, published author, a trainer, a motivator, a coach, and he is a warrior, a true warrior. Richard is known as the Grand Master, Richard Morris, who is a lifelong martial artist and has been teaching karate since 1971. He's got a 10th degree black belt in American karate under Grandmasters Pat Burleson and Alan Steen. He retired in 2014 from Fort Worth Police Department's Tactical Investigations Division as the Gang Intelligence and Detective Sergeant after nearly 36 years. That's an accomplishment in itself that you stayed alive. We're going to talk more about that. But while in the Tactical Investigations Division, Richard worked closely with the FWPD Homeland Security Intel, Criminal Tracking, Human Trafficking, SWAT, Zero Tolerance Division, Homicide, and Narcotics units. Holy man, this is going to be so good. Richard coordinated gang intelligence and gang detectives' organized crime investigations, including drug, crime, and homicide cases. Richard continues to serve Fort Worth Police Department as a veteran member of the police support team and critical incident and stress management team. He's a response commander for the Texas Line of Duty Death Task Force. He serves as a reserve Tarrant County deputy constable and is the volunteer chaplain for several law enforcement agencies. You have an amazing career, Richard, but not only have you got this amazing warrior mentality, but you also founded Ziglar Blue with the late Zig Ziglar's son, Tom. So we're going to be right back with Richard after this message. Good morning, Richard. So did you share to your stream? You got to share to the stream.
Not yet. I'm trying to find it. Didn't pop up.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know what to do.
So all you got to do is just go to my Facebook.
Okay.
And this is a great exercise for those of you who are listening and happen to be guests on other people's podcasts. You should really be forwarding your podcast to your streams. So go to the wall. If you are at the wall, Richard?
Yes.
Okay, now you're going to want to say share and share over to your Facebook.
Okay. Oh, do I have to go all the way down?
You might have to. It's hard to say.
You got a lot on there.
No, it should be at the very top.
Oh.
No problem. And so while Richard is doing that, so I've had I've had the distinct honor and pleasure of actually meeting Richard a couple weeks ago as part of the research to Jim Cathcart in my book called Intelligent Curiosity. Now, if there is anybody in the world that I truly, in a law enforcement capacity, esteem to really hear more stories about, it's Richard. I mean, we've had several conversations, some amazing stories. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some great stoes from you, Richard. How'd you make out? You get it shared?
I did.
Awesome. All right.
You're a great teacher.
Richard, I don't even know where to begin. So I'm just going to begin this conversation with this one question. What is a warrior mindset?
A warrior could be a spiritual warrior, like a Billy Graham. It could be a social warrior, like Rosa Parks, for example. Mm-hmm. It could be someone who is willing to run towards the fire, towards the gunfire, instead of away from it, which is what most people do. And so you just have to have a strong spirit.
And so how did you 1971, you started in the police service. So tell me, why the police service? And I know we've talked a little bit about, your father and his work in the military with General Patton, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so did that play an instrumental role in your decision to become this fierce warrior in life? Tell us a little bit more about the backstory.
Well, I started the police department in 78, but started taking karate in 71.
Yeah.
But back, I was 5 or 6 years old. I started boxing. My dad was a professional boxer before he went into World War II. And he even boxed with the OSS under General Wild Bill Donovan, bare knuckle boxing. Made enough money because Donovan would put money on him. And so I made enough money to pay cash for a house when he got out of the Army. Dad was such a gentle person. You would never know that he was so tough. But I heard the stories, those that he would tell. He's from the World War II group, and they keep pretty much to themselves. But he taught me how to fight since I was a young kid, 5 or 6 years old. I'm 64 now. And he said that two things. One, if you're a Morris, you have to make sure you honor the Morris name. Yep. Be respectable. Don't do anything that would hurt our reputation, even those that have gone before you in the past. Yep. And he said another thing is what Morrises do is we protect the innocent. We help those people that are getting picked on, that are getting hurt. So I just grew up with that mindset. Mm-hmm. I did the same with my children, and they're both black belts and incredibly tough, but incredibly kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
well, and I think you have to be incredibly tough. Clearly, is the Morris mantra, right? Like that's the mantra that you grew up with. It's the mantra that you gifted to your children. But it's one thing to think and grow up and be given that mindset. It's clearly another thing to actually take action on it. And so walk us through some of the early days of your career, and tell us a couple stories about what happened that got you to be where you are today.
Well, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, Dad was just genetically incredibly strong.
Yeah.
And so when I was 8 years old, I was breaking not only the nut but the bolts on the bicycles. So he said, "You got to quit doing that. We can't afford to keep paying for these. It's expensive." And we were poor. We didn't have much money.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Come over here to the car. I'm going to change my tire. I want you to try this and this one because I know you're not going to hurt it." Well, I broke 2 of the bolts on the car. So he said, "All right, number one, don't ever hit your brothers in the face. As a matter of fact, don't hit anybody in the face. And the second thing is I'm getting you a torque wrench for Christmas." And so I've just been strong. I don't even try to be strong. I just genetically, I guess, physically strong. And so growing up, even though I had a loving mom and dad, I learned lessons from their parents, even though my grandparents were gone long before I was born. My dad's father was a business merchant, and my mom's dad was a Methodist preacher. He was an evangelist, a circuit rider. He rode a horse with a gun on one side because he was also the town constable and had a Bible on the other. So he'd go to 4 or 5 churches on Sunday. And so I grew up hearing the stories. It's important that we tell our children these stories. Yeah. And even if they say, "You told me that before," that's okay. I want you to hear it, I would tell them, because this is your story too in the backdrop. Yeah. And so growing up, even though I was physically strong and I've never lost a fight, even as a little kid, I was a year younger than people in school. So when I found out that we were poor, I didn't know that. And I didn't know. I had anything to compare it to. So I went to school, and I had an old used bicycle with a hard rubber tire because I wouldn't get a flat.
Yep.
But kids made fun of me because they had the bells and all those things. So I remember that I would still see these big kids. So there was a boy that was almost 6 foot tall, was beating up a little kid. Now I was a little kid. I was in 3rd grade at this time. And I said, "You should leave him alone. You ought to pick on someone your own size." Yeah. He says, "Well, how about I pick on you?" I said, "I'm a little kid too." So anyway, he started to fight me. I got him, turned him around, choked him out, and a scissor lock, because I did wrestling too. And jiu-jitsu. Yeah. My dad was a jiu-jitsu teacher in the Army as well. So I learned how to fight on my feet or on the ground. And teachers came in and pulled us apart, and couldn't believe that here I am, someone twice my size. I have him unconscious here in the school ground. Yeah. I didn't get in trouble. but he did. And I think he was afraid of me after that. I never got in any more fights in elementary school. Same thing happened in middle school. In high school, I was already doing karate by this time. I started in 71. And I missed my first belt test because it cost $5. I didn't know it would cost anything.
Yeah.
And we didn't have $5. We could not scrape it up because we were paying $18 a month for the karate classes.
Yeah.
I mowed yards to help pay for the lessons. And I went to the karate school, and Paul Smith was one of Pat Burleson's students. He was a brown belt, and at that time, that was a high belt. They could run karate schools. Even blue belts ran karate studios back then. Very few black belts in the United States.
Yeah.
And so Dad signed me up there. And once I did, my second day in class, I was sparring with this guy. He was a big, strong 18-year-old kid. He's a blue belt. He was tough.
Yep.
And he kept hitting me in the face. And the teacher said, Richard, if he hits you in the face, hit him back. I says, I can't. So it happened again. And he said, Richard, hit him in the face. I said, I can't. He said, why can't you? I said, my dad told me not to hit anybody in the face. And then he looks at my dad. I look at my dad. He nodded and winked, and I knocked him out. He was out for about 15, 20 minutes. So he says, I see now why your dad told you not to hit anybody in the face. And so even in the karate classes, I was physically strong for somebody as small. I was 5'3", 135 pounds. This guy was probably 5'11", 185. He was muscular. Was strong. And I stayed in karate, but when I started teaching the same year, and the way that happened, there were not many kids in karate class. And Pat Burleson at that time did not want to teach children. And usually they were 11, 12 years old if they did come in.
Yeah.
So I would help him in 71. I started helping teach classes. I've only been in karate 3 or 4 months, but I worked out 5 to 8 hours a day, even then, especially during the summertime.
Yeah.
And so I knew all the katas. I knew all the things I needed to know. I set a goal, found out how long it's going to take to make it to black belt. And if I did it, tested every time and was prepared every time, I could make it in 3 years. Well, I had to wait the 2 months because I didn't have the $5. And then one day I was in class. Pardon me. I was paired up with Pam Watson. She was a black belt. And or brown belt at that time, but her husband was the national champion on the front cover of the karate magazines, a guy named Billy Watson.
Right. And
so I saw, we're supposed to kick each other in the chest. I said, I can't kick you in the chest. He said, your butter or Mr. Burks is going to come over here. So I didn't have a choice. And then she looked at her husband and he winked too. I thought, oh gosh, that's not good. I know it's not good.
I know that.
I wished at that time that I had the gift of invisibility, but I didn't have that.
Yeah. So
I started sparring with him. So to shorten this story, he kicked me so hard in the leg doing a sweep. My leg was so frogged I couldn't walk. But it didn't matter because I was knocked out after he blackened both my eyes, broke my nose, and broke some ribs. In other words, he beat me up. But then while I'm on the ground, then he started fighting me. And I thought, oh, this is horrible. And so when I left that night, I hobbled to my motorcycle. I got on and I cried all the way home. So, because I love karate and I love helping him teach, but I shouldn't get beat up by somebody, a great big national champion black belt. I was a blue belt. I was just a little kid, still about 5'7" or 8 and 135, 40 pounds. So I said, well, Dad, I want to quit karate. He said, why? I says, well, I got beat up pretty bad today by Billy Watson. He said, Billy Watson did that to you? I said, yes, sir. And he saw I had broken nose. My eyes looked like a raccoon already. Yeah. My jaw was rattled. I mean, he really physically beat me up. And so he said, well, that shouldn't happen. He said, we just got you that black gi. Back then, you couldn't wear a black gi unless you were a black belt. Yeah. But since I was helping Mr. Burleson teach, he gave me a black gi. And it had a black belt that came with a package. Yeah. And he said, put this on your wall, set your goals, and one day you'll wear that. What I didn't tell him, I used to wear it when nobody was around at home. I did not go outside with it, not in the front. Yep. But I thought that was important for me to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So we get there, and Mr. Morrison said, Richard, how come you're running late? Well, you're always here helping me teach. I said, well, I'm quitting karate. He said, what? I said, I'm quitting karate. And my dad said, Mr. Burleson, could I talk to you? He said, yes, sir. He said, Richard, if you want to quit, that's okay, and I'll take the gi back. But would you teach class while I'm talking to your dad? I can't just leave these kids out here. I said, yes, sir. So I was teaching, and he came out about 30 or 35 minutes later, and he's standing there watching me teach. And by that time, I loved it. I loved teaching.
And so he knew that would be the ticket to get you to stay, right? He already knew that of you.
Yes. And so I never really found out until after my dad died what they talked about. But
yeah.
But he came out and he said, well, let me ask you, Richard, do you like teaching? I said, yes, sir. He said, class, do you like have Richard teaching class? They said, yes, sir. He said, then from now on, he is Mr. Morris. He is no longer Richard. And so I was going to quit. And all of a sudden now I'm teaching. I've got my own class. Yeah. Made $5 a class, every class. And so I made a little bit of money, but back in 71, that $5 was pretty good for, that's a belt test fee.
Yeah. So how did you go from teaching in the karate school or karate, depending on who says it, but to actually being, to gang? Like, I mean, you were part of gang intelligence for a number of years. So how, walk us through the story of how did you go from there to there?
Let me just a short aside. I found out from Pat Burleson after my dad died. He said, have you ever wondered what your daddy and I talked about that day that you first started teaching? I said, I've always wondered. He said, Mr. Burleson, don't let him get beat up by these grown men. And not until he gets some size on him. I don't mind him getting hurt, but the grown men shouldn't be doing that. He said, but I want you to make a man out of my son.
Wow.
And so again, he wanted me to grow up and be a man. So when I fought on my black belt test was 1974 in April, and I fought a professional boxer named Tex Cobb, Randy Tex Cobb. Never been knocked out by George Foreman. Nobody ever knocked him out. He went 12 or 15 rounds, but I knocked him out twice and broke his nose on the belt test. This was the time they called karate. It was the bloody era. There was a lot of blood, a lot of violence. On belt tests, half the people made black belt, and half of them went to the emergency room. The other half didn't pass. So I passed my black belt, and as I got to be 18, and then I graduated from school. I graduated from school when I was 17, but once I turned 18, I decided I wanted to. Somebody introduced me to a place called Spencer's Corner. It was a nightclub across from TCU where a lot of teenage kids would go and dance, or young college kids. And so I went there, and I noticed that there were people fighting and fussing and so forth. I thought, no, I think this is kind of neat. I think I could do this. The bouncer was a fellow black belt of mine. He made black belt after I did. But I started working there as a bouncer and a bartender. And I know my dad, he thought it was okay. I'm sure Mom wasn't very tickled with her dad being a Methodist preacher. And so I became a bouncer and a bartender, and I was in dozens and dozens and dozens of fights. George Bray, the other black belt, he was a grown man, and he was 6'4" and 240. He is strong. And these big old TCU football players would come up to him, said, we're going to beat you up. He said, hold on a second. Richard, come here a second. He said, and of course I smile all the time. I think my face is just shaped like that. I can't help it. And he said, Richard, these guys think they're going to beat me up. I said, ooh, that's a bad idea. And then George always said, you can't even whoop Richard. I said, no, that's right. And that really, so they fight me. And of course, that's where I beat up so many of these big old football players.
Yeah.
But I met police officers there that were working at the job as a part-time police officer. And so while they provided security, I spent time with them, but I really like these guys. I've always wanted to be a policeman. And I thought that would be a good way that I can help people, again, the Morris legacy, to love and help other people. And so I started writing in the police.
Crap out of them.
Yeah.
With love and kindness.
That's right. And these policemen said, "Oh my God, Richard, we don't learn anything in the academy. This is good." So I started training police officers because I was riding in the police car with them at night when I wasn't working or after I got off work. And so I started working on a lot of things. I found that some of the stuff I learned in the karate studio, and I was taking judo too at the same time, but a lot of this stuff wasn't working and in the fight. So I asked questions about everything. And I said, "Mr. Burleson, why do we do it this way?" He said, "Shut up." It's kind of was a common answer back then. Yeah. Years later, I became Pat Burleson's teacher. And he said, "Richard, where did you get this stuff? Where did you learn this stuff?" "I trained Bruce Lee. I trained with Bruce Lee." You have a greater understanding than he did." I said, well, first, thank you, but I don't agree with that part, but I'm learning. And I said, the second thing, he died at 32 years old, and I'm older than that. He said, where'd you start? I said, "Do you remember when I asked you in class, why do we do it this way?" He said, "I do." I said, "You remember what you said?" He said, "I do." I said, "That's when it began. I'm very curious, intuitive. I want to learn how to fight." Yeah. So I started training police, and then Becky and I got married. By the way, I'm old-fashioned. It's maybe hard for some people to believe this, but I never kissed my wife until after we got married.
Wow.
Because she wasn't my wife until after we got married.
Wow. Wow.
So I saw her one night. I was a bouncer at the club. I was a professional kickboxer. I was a full contact fighter kickboxer for the Fort Worth Texans and Texas Gladiators. Trained with Chuck Norris and his team. He had the LA Stars, and we would fight against them and others. And one night, I remember looking in the mirror and I just started crying. And I said, "God, I think I need to do something different. I'm going out with too many girls." And I was. My hair was long, and I was a professional fighter, so I had a lot of girlfriends. You
were the man that every girl should stay away from, because you were the naughty boy that everybody wanted.
But I was also very polite. I tried to always be a gentleman. Again, that Morris legacy. Yeah. And so I said, "God, if you'll help me find the girl that I'm supposed to be with, then I will stay with her and protect her for the rest of my life. And I want to serve you. Help me find a way to serve you." Yeah. Which is good, because I hadn't been to church at that time in about 8 years. We were kicked out of 2 churches because we were too poor.
And so you met your wife and
So I look down and I see a pretty girl look at me and smile, and I may have smiled. I just do that, but not interested. And all of a sudden, I see a face scoot over like this. I saw her from here up, and I heard a voice. "This is the girl that you asked for. You're going to be with her for the rest of your life. Be good to her."
Yeah, yeah.
I knew then that was the one. My dad met my mom there when it was a drugstore. Dad was a short order cook after World War II, and Mom used to come there. They both went to TCU, and they met there at the same place, got married. So I go downstairs. I didn't know if she was 300 or 400 pounds. I didn't know if she had, hairy legs and hairy arms. I had no idea. And I look at her and I said, "Oh, Jesus, you are so good to me," because she was just drop dead beautiful, and still is today. We've been married now over 43 years, and we're just getting started.
Congratulations.
But on the way
often nowadays, right? You don't see people making, hell, you hardly ever see anybody make the 10-year mark, never mind 43 years.
I tell you what I've learned, I do a lot of study, and one thing I find is that research, people thought, well, half the people are going to get divorced whether they're Christian or not. And really, that's about right. About half will be divorced within 2 years, unless you hold hands together and you have that intimacy without no other expectations but to pray together every day. And if you do that, it makes it less than a 1 in 1,000 that gets divorced. So I try to tell all my police buddies that.
That's the secret. That's the secret sauce. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And she, like I said, she's beautiful. I like holding her hand.
Yeah.
And we pray together daily several times. And so I wanted to be a policeman. And she said, "It's dangerous." I said, well, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go, regardless of what I'm doing. I believe that God's in control.
Yeah.
And so we dropped by the police department, and I finished my application process on the way home from our honeymoon. And she cried and cried because he said, Ray Cairns, the sergeant, said, well, you know, a lot of policemen get killed. There's several got killed in the last couple of years, and more than half of them are divorced. You know, just within 6 months or so.
And policing in the 70s looked very different than it looks now.
Yeah.
Right?
We used to take people to jail unconscious.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And so I became a police officer, and within a few years, I began teaching at the academy, and I started their officer survival program. I started arrest control tactics, several different things. Officer survival school. I was myself and one of my fellow police officers started that, and it was copied all over the United States, the program. And so I knew that one is I better be a good husband, and the second thing is that God did put me here, I feel like, with all my heart, to help and protect the innocent, including the police.
Yeah.
I tell police officers in Texas, it's against the law for a police officer to let an innocent person be injured. It's in their code of criminal procedure.
Yeah.
But that innocent person, if you are so, also includes the police officer. In other words, we violate the law if we don't take care of ourselves. And so I try to remind people of that.
Well, and you had a conversation offset a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that really intrigued me about one of the stories that you told, Richard, was about you're in a fight, and we're going to get to this story, but you're in the fight, but at the same time you're respectful of the criminal, and that's how you often, the way that your mind works in the moment is really a warrior mindset. Yeah. And so you talked about, and I would love you to share this story again about how there was a gang fight, and then the gang ended up fighting each other while you stood back and watched it all unfold. And that to me was just like, wow, that is a warrior mindset. How do you really, truly turn tables on a situation to the benefit without using your fists?
So I've been studying the science of fighting for 40 years.
Exactly.
Now, so I knew how the brain worked. I knew how the fight or flight mechanism worked, how to keep the vagus nerve from causing you to go into a panic. And there's several. If you lift your shoulders up, your diaphragm doesn't move. Your diaphragm shoots the message up, and you go into fight or flight. So just going like this puts you in a fight or flight response. But if you drop your shoulders and relax and breathe a little bit, it can keep you from going into that. So when I got into a fight, I'm pretty calm. It's like playing checkers for me. Not that I'm tough, but it's that I'm calm. Yeah. And I'm able to keep my wits about me. A friend of mine, Roy Kerbin, he's a 10th degree black belt and 9th degree in Taekwondo, both like myself. I am as well. And I've known him 45 years or so. And he said, Richard, I think the old Roy Kerbin would beat this Roy Kerbin up. I said, well, that's interesting. He said, what do you mean? I said, this Richard Morris, old as I am, would absolutely destroy the old Richard Morris. He said, why? I said, I understand the science that makes it work. Yeah. So one day I was out in patrol in East Fort Worth, and it was rough. In that area, when I worked East Side, I got shot 4 times, stabbed, run over, and hit by a car. And plus, some people were just downright mean to me. Yeah. And this one day, I'm over by a convenience store, called in because of a gang is threatening the people at the store. So I go over there, and the OG, which is the original gangster, he is the old guy. He's the guy, doesn't talk, but just nods. Then the guy's trying to earn stripes or trying to get credit, trying to gain rank, kind of like the belt rank in karate or military. So that guy was loud and troublemaker. So he said, man, I'm going to beat you up or something like that. I said, is that really what you want? And I said, it may not turn out like you want. And so he comes over there, and I just go, wham, I hit him. And then I grab him by the neck, and I hold him up.
And now this is a gang. This is a gang member, right? This is right? Yeah.
Yes, he's one of these young gangsters trying to earn more stripes. So I'm holding him with his feet off the ground, and this guy, he must have made a face because he was unconscious. So what I did, I walked toward them and said, "Who's next?" And then I threw this guy in the midst of all of them, and they bumped into each other and they started fighting, and they beat each other up. So by the time the other officers came, I was leaning against the wall and just relaxing. And they said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." I said, "These guys are." Seems like they're mad at each other. You see that twice in the Old Testament. Joshua, for example, you could see in Judges, and as you look to the Old Testament, that where people were literally devouring each other, and that's what they did. And so I didn't have to fight anybody that night. Well, I did hit that one guy, but that's not much of a fight. I have been in several hundred fights, but that was not one. But I was using intelligence instead of using physical force. Now, they were impressed that I held him off the ground because he was my size, but it was when people find that I understand how to fight and I don't react I don't start cussing. What happens is someone starts cursing. By the way, 95% of fights begin with profanity, 95%. And so when they start cussing, a lot of times, I call that the child, because when Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, a friend of mine, we're writing a book called On Fighting together. He wrote On Killing, On Combat, and several others. But he says that it's like the puppy dog brain. So when you're in that fight or flight mechanism, you're not using your forebrain. You're using the ancient brain, some people call it a lizard or reptilian brain, but it's certainly not the prefrontal cortex. So what happens is if the police officer or any other person starts arguing too, they both escalate because they both are like children. So if someone's angry or drunk or just out of control, you cannot talk to them and make sense. You're talking to a child.
Like a child.
So, but what happens is a police officer tries to talk to that child as an adult, and I talk to them as a child. You know, you get these big SWAT guys have been Delta operators. You know, I trained a lot of those people. Yeah. But you see them when they have their canine dog, they look tough, they have a beard, and then they go, come on, baby. Come on, baby. It's so funny because the higher pitch causes them to calm down. So I talk with a little higher voice, and I talk to them very simple. Be nice. Now stop. I do not yell at people in a fight. Again, that gets me up here with them. So now we're both children, and we end up hurting each other. But once you talk to them, you can get them back. You can get them back.
Tell us, you know, I know that you have a number of stories. So tell us a story where that really took a highly escalated moment where you're intelligently curious about how to diffuse the situation using this warrior mindset, the science of fighting, how that got used.
I'll give you one example. I trained a lot of police still, and never missed a week of teaching for 50 years. I really love this stuff. It's almost 50, a few more months. But I was teaching class, and Jose Duran, one of my officers, he's a 4th degree black belt. He said, "Sergeant Morris, do you remember that time this great big guy, he and his wife were fighting, and you got the call with me, and we went up to the apartment. Do you remember all that?" I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I've had a lot like that." He said, "Well, this guy was standing out on the balcony, and he was at least twice your size. And you just quietly walked up to him and said, 'Sir, now look, we are on the 3rd floor. This balcony, it'd be a long ways for you to fall. And if you don't calm down, I'm going to throw you off this balcony.'" He goes, "Huh? What?" And he kind of shook his head. They do that. They shake their heads like sparks going off in their head. And he said, "I do remember that." And so we went inside and talked. And he said, "And one thing that impressed me about you, Sergeant Morris, is we got there, you brought calm because you don't yell and scream. And I don't cuss, I don't use that language. I used to. I could make an 18-syllable word out of a 2-syllable word. Not a sign of high IQ, but he said, when we left, remember we all got together, put our hands on each other's shoulders and prayed. I said, I do remember that. And I'm known for that because people know me for understanding the science of fighting, but I also understand the science of peace. Yeah. And you cannot be, you have to use violence to sometimes bring peace. When Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God or children of God. It doesn't say peace enjoyers. We all enjoy peace, but the police officer or the military, sometimes they have to use force to protect the innocent and then bring peace in that way. That's the only way that you can truly have peace. So you have to be strong, but you have to be wise. And I try to help police officers to be wise.
Be wise. Well, and to diffuse the situation using that mindset, right? Understanding the science of fighting. So we have about 10 minutes left in the show, and there's a story that you and I had a discussion about that absolutely resonated with me, and it was the story about your father who was left for dead. And you know how life plays a series of events that occurred in your life that brought a closure to that story. And it's a phenomenal story. And I think it's a story that, I really want you to share with the audience, because this is a story, folks, that truly, you need to listen to the very end, because it is jaw-dropping what happens. So,
and if I cry, I tell people I'm a 10th degree black belt and I carry a gun. I cry whenever I want to. I'm just tenderhearted. But I was chaplain for the police department, and I went out to talk to an officer that night who'd been involved in a killing. He killed a guy, and the guy killed his dog. He was a canine officer, and I ended up counseling with people all night. As a chaplain, I'm a biblical counselor as well. Mm-hmm. I a peer team member. I do critical incident stress. So I would go out, instead of sitting in my office as chaplain, I would go out amongst the people and meet with them. Well, that officer I was going to meet with just didn't happen to be there that night. He had taken off the last minute, but I was talking to people all night long, and I'm going in, and I said, well, guys, it's about time for me to go home. I talk to him all the time. I think that's okay. Dr. Joyce Brothers says, not only is it okay to talk to yourself, it's all right to answer, but if you go, then you got trouble. Yep. That's from my buddy Zig. And so this night I was about to go home, and it's like God said, no, stay put. And all of a sudden I hear an officer crying and screaming on the radio, help me. And I was just 4 or 5 blocks away. I said, I'll be right there. So I drive up, and I didn't have a computer in my car. Chaplains, I had a K car with a ceiling liner hanging down. It wasn't too fancy. So I got there, and the officer said, oh, thank God, it's Sergeant Morris, or Chaplain Morris at that time. So I pulled it, because they know because I can fight, but I pulled the guy off, and I was handcuffing him. I did not know there were four more guys. So one guy came around the corner, kicked me in the forehead. My head went all the way back, they said, and hit my spine. It just folded me in half at the neck, and that's not good. I ended up having surgery a few years later. But it knocked me out, and I remember I see the kick coming, but by that time it was only inches from me, and I had my head down. I've learned to do it differently now. I drop my eyes and not my head. But I rolled over, and they said that these guys just started kicking me in the head, stomping on my face and head and so forth. I don't remember the fight, but then they said I just shook my head and stood up and grabbed these guys, lifted them over my head, and threw them down on top of the car, hit them on my knee. Anyway, beat up these five men. And so as I did, the officers came, and a sergeant that was out there, Kevin Foster, said, are you okay? I said, oh, sure, I'm fine. He said, do you know where you are? And I'm looking around. I said, not exactly. He said, all right, do you know who you are? I said, sure. All right, who are you? I didn't know. It's like I couldn't connect. I almost knew, but couldn't connect. He said, do you know where you live? And I said, No. So they took me to the hospital. When they took me out and did all the MRIs and X-rays and all so forth, the doctor says, "Well, Richard, you're fortunate you have a concussion, and you certainly have a post-concussive amnesia." He said, "But your neck's fine. It looks like nothing's broken, at least." I said, "Good. Then can I get up?" And he said, "Well, sure." Well, I didn't know who I was, but I still knew my relationship with God. That, to me, that was interesting. So I walked over to all the officers, and the officers are crying. I can't believe they kicked the chaplain, and I didn't know who these people were because I didn't remember their names. They looked kind of familiar, but I couldn't tell who they were. But I said, "Do you mind if we pray together?" And they said, "Sure." And there's one great big guy with us, and he started. He was so angry, and I said, "Well, how many boys were there?" He said, "Well, there were five men." I said, "Thank you." I said, "Heavenly Father, I ask you to forgive these 5 men for what they've done. I ask you not to hold it against them. Let them be accountable. Let them find a relationship with your Son, Jesus Christ, wherever they may be, the hospital or jail." And this officer started cussing. I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't talk to God that way. Save that for your prayer." And so I said, "And God, I know that all things work out for good for those who love you, that are called by you." So I knew my scripture, according to your purpose. And I said, "Help us, even in the midst of this travesty that happened tonight, let us find good from all these things that happened." So my fellow chaplain, he was chaplain, I was associate chaplain, gave me a ride home. I didn't know. The house looked kind of familiar. Of course, I'd lived there since I was a kid because I bought the house after my parents died. And
you belonged there, but you didn't know why, right?
I didn't know why. And I went to the back door because that's what we used to do. But my wife and I, since we bought the house, we went to the front door. I didn't know. So I said, "I think we're supposed to go back here." And then so I knocked on the door and I said, "Introduce me to her. I don't remember her." And so my wife came to the door. She said, "Where have you been? We've got a belt test at 9:00 today." I said, I don't know. And Mitch Felder said, "Well, Becky, Richard got hurt tonight. He got a head injury. He's has some amnesia, and he's been at the hospital all night." And he said, "Richard, this is your wife, Becky." I said, "Wow, she's hot." So I still feel that way, by the way. Such a beautiful person, inside and out.
Yeah.
So I had a karate studio inside Ridgemar Mall, but I didn't go to karate that day, but I went the following week, and I didn't know who I was for like 6 or 8 weeks. I kind of know my name and kind of what I did, but I just was completely lost. They said I had 60 to 100 seizures an hour, the neurologist told me. And so it's called an absent seizure. I found that out once I became an EMT a few years ago. And so it was time to renew the lease, and I couldn't read. So I couldn't read. I'd read the word or a paragraph. I don't remember any. I had zero memory. The hippocampus was swollen. As a matter of fact, my left eye only opened about halfway. I believe it was my left eye. And from the swelling of my brain. And so I gave my school away, just sold the mats and materials and took some of my black belts. And I said, "Well, Becky, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know that God will find something for me." And then all of a sudden, ring, ring, ring. And it's the district superintendent, the person that assigns you to a church if you're a Methodist pastor. And she said, "Is this Richard Morris?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Richard, do you know anything about Venus, Texas?" I said, "I know that's where the women are from. That's about all I know. Men are from Mars, I understand. Women are from Venus, but that's all I know." And so she said, No. It's next to close to Alvarado. I said, "No, I've never been there." And she said, "Would you like to be the pastor?" I said, "Well, sure." She said, "You didn't ask how much it's going to pay." I said, "Well, it doesn't matter. Believe me, I think this is a sign from God that I'm supposed to take it." And she said, "But there's a guy there been robbing people in the sanctuary, and pulling knife on people. People are scared. The pastors don't stay more than 2 months. They're afraid. I said, well, that sounds like the place for me, because I don't think that I'll be afraid. And by that time, I had learned, by learning how to move my eyes before I moved, it reconnected my brain literally. And as a matter of fact, I've had 3 medical studies done on me. One about not getting atrophy. I don't get atrophy. I don't believe in it. The second one was from how eye movement helps with memory. And the third one is how eye movement is important for proprioception and balance. So anyway, so I ended up going down to the church, and there was a young couple. The pastor I wasn't supposed to be there till Sunday, but the pastor that was supposed to be there was scared to. She said, she was a lady. She said, I can't go down there. I'm terrified. Only 5 or 6 people there, but this guy's got a knife. I said, oh, okay. She said, would you go talk to a couple and do some counseling with them before they get married? I said, sure. So I was down there doing that. By the way, I went to the church, and Nelda Frederick became my church mom. She was I'm part of the pastoral relations. I love her so much. She's like my church mom. And I said, but Nelda, I noticed on the sign, it says that church starts at 9 or at 9. And the other one says it starts at 9:25. She said, well, we ran out of 3s. It's 9:30. I said, okay. So I knew I was in for a ride. And truly just a beautiful experience. That first day, 2 men tried to come up and fight me. One of them is because there was a boy that was fighting in the sanctuary. Well, it was the guy that had a knife all the time. This day, he didn't have a knife, had a scabbard. So he came in and said, sit down. He said, you can't tell me what to do. It was he and the other boy. I said, yes, I can. This is my church. I'm the pastor. I can come here. This is my town. My dead son can do anything I want to. I said, well, not here. You're going to have to behave. I'll let you come, but you're going to have to mind. Anyway, I said, do you have a knife? He said, you're not a cop. It's none of your business. So I showed him my badge. He said, that's not fair. So then I checked them both, couldn't find the knife. And all of a sudden, one of the church members ran out, Pastor, get in the basement. A tornado is headed this way. It's only a block away. It just touched down. I said, oh, that's okay. Is that another sign, God? So we took go down the basement, and then the tornado lifted. It went right by the church. So I told the boys that they could go home. I'd like to talk to their parents later. And all of a sudden, there's this guy running up. His face pierced everywhere, tattooed. I don't know anywhere that wasn't tattooed, and he didn't have a shirt on. And one of the guys said, oh no, this guy, he's been in jail 18 times. He just got out of prison. I said, so he's not a member of the Men's Society, I guess. And I don't think they understood what I was saying, but I thought that was hilarious. So he said, I'm going to kill the pastor. And he's yelling and cussing and screaming. And I was staying calm. I was on the other side of the car. And he said, where's the pastor? I said, well, that would be me. And he started talking. I said, can I ask you a question? When you ask people questions, it interrupts their thought process, and it helps them become more cognitive. So you're talking to the adult, not the child. Right. And so I said, are you upset about something? And sparks were flying everywhere. And then I'm walking around the car, and I got one more question. He said, what's that? I said, did you come here to fight me? Well, like Barney Fife would have said, he lit out of there. Man, this guy ran twice as fast away. One of the ladies said, Rick, Pastor Morris said, coming back Sunday. I said, yeah, so it tells me this kind of church I'm supposed to be at. Similar thing happened with another dad. And then it was church time. I was there for 5 years. And about 4.5 years in, I was teaching on the power of influence. And I told a story about my dad in World War II. He was shot up in Germany. I believe it was Cologne, Germany. I don't know how it smells over there, but I mean, that's just the name of the town. And Dad got shot up real bad with machine gun fire. And they pronounced him dead. They tore off his tags. They sent a dear soldier's parents letter, your son has died protecting his country. And they had him laying there, literally so many soldiers stacked there, one by another, or lined up one by another, laying there dead. And then these 2 medics came by, and Dad said, I could hear them. I just couldn't talk. I lost so much blood. He said, but I could move my little finger. And I went, and pulled the sheet down a little bit. One of them said, hey, this soldier's still alive. Other one said, he's not going to make it. We might as well spend our time on the ones that can make a difference. And he said, no, you grab his feet, I'll grab his shoulders, we'll get him in. So they took him in, had surgery. And Dad said, Dad had told me this, I'd forgotten this at the time, but the guy, he and his dad had a lawnmower shop somewhere around Alvarado. But we never could find that place. Dad and I looked for it. He wanted to find the guy that saved his life. And he told me the story. So I told the story, and then after church, one of the guys came up and said, can I ask you a question, Pastor Morris? And I thought that was funny because my dad always did that. He was real shy, he's quiet, tough as he could be, but he was so shy. And I said, sure. I said, let me say goodbye to these folks and then I'll be right there. So that happened. And he said, what was your daddy's name? This gentleman's O.V. Jackson. I said, his daddy is Jim Morris. He went by James Morris sometimes. He said, did he ever go by J.D.? I said, no, some people called him J.P. His middle name was Pugh, after a family friend. And he said, your dad had 10, 11 brothers and sisters. I said, yes, sir. Fort Worth boy. I said, yes, sir. He said, did he have like a wrestler or something? I said, no, but he had a boxer on his arm. Dad had been a professional boxer. And it's cool because he could go like this with his muscle and the box would go like that. I thought
and that would have been so unique in that time because there wouldn't have been a lot of tattoos back then.
Not a lot of, not like now. I mean, people, it's just,
right? Everybody has tattooed. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And so he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, that was me. He said, I was there. He said, I was there and I heard him. And the other guy said, no, he's not going to make it. He said, you grab him by the feet and I'm going to grab him. So he took him in. He said he had surgery. It was 6 or 8 hours long. He went through 16 pints of blood. And we didn't think he was going to make it. And even after the surgery, he got shut up so bad. Even after the surgery, we brought him in, and we didn't know if he was going to make it, but he did. And he said, and when he got to where he could sit up a little bit, and someone moved out that was by the window, I moved him over by the window. And Dad had told me that, but I'd forgotten that. Yeah. And he said, yes. And so he was quiet, wasn't he? Shy, but funny. I said, oh, yeah, that's my dad. And he said, loved his family. I said, oh, yeah, family is everything to my dad. And then he said he read his Bible every day. Well, I didn't know that until then.
It's phenomenal. I mean, you think about, we always say karma, right? Karma, we're on a certain path. Like I do believe we're on a path and we meet people for certain reasons and we have choices along that path. Sure. And our choices is where we land up. But to think about that story of your dad in the war, almost dead, 2 soldiers walking by, one says, leave him. The other says, no, leave no man behind, which is the military mantra, right? Like no soldier left behind. And then years and years and years later, I mean, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Yeah. What's the chances of you being in a church in the same time that particular officer?
Yeah.
Like that's phenomenal story. Phenomenal.
Had I not learned how to fight, had I not become a policeman, had I not become a chaplain and pastor, my police chief asked me to be chaplain, and had a karate school, then I wouldn't have given my school away. So it all worked out, and then the dominoes go down. Yeah,
but even more importantly, I think the story of, yes, those were the series of events for sure, Richard. Yeah. But here's the thing that had you not understood the science behind fighting, had you not understood the value of intelligent curiosity, had you not understand the science of peace, those 3 things would never have put you in that church that day.
Oh, I know it. And he said, I'll bring something next week and show you. So he brought a book and he said, this is the field hospital. Here's where your daddy was when we found him. We brought him in here and had the surgery. And he said, I said, well, what caused you to go into the Army? He said, well, my dad and I had a lawnmower shop in there. Oh, I'd forgotten that. And he said, over in Maypearl or Ovila, one of those small towns close by. And he said, I got tired of them hurting our boys, so I became an Army nurse. And that's where I was when I met your dad. Well, OV died not long after that. And I was blessed to be able to preach his funeral. So the timing was just perfect. And I met the man that saved my daddy's life. And so that's why I think we have to look for those turning points in our life, those little God winks, sometimes that people use that term. The intersections where God was in the midst of it, even in the midst of a travesty, and how God can bring good out of even the most difficult of circumstances.
Well, and sometimes it's difficult. I mean, I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe that sometimes it's very difficult to see the gratitude in the situation, in the moment, right? And so I think when we look for those moments that are on the edge of the experience, that's where we learn the most, that's where we grow, and that's really where the miracles happen.
Interesting thing is, I'm not religious either, and nor was Jesus. He was spiritual. And if anything, I'm spiritual. I'm a Christian, but I have friends, gosh, any faith and all faith or no faith. And being a chaplain, you minister and love them all. And I absolutely do. And I think the faith that I had only helps me understand why these twists and turns happen. And I am so grateful for that, because it has made my life just so complete, finding the man that saved my daddy. Because he was my hero, my dad. And Dad died in 92. And this was back in about 2003 or 4.
Wow.
And so he's been long gone.
Yeah. But I mean, what a closure to an amazing legacy. Because it's not a story, it's a legacy, right? It's the Morris legacy that will continue on in your children and their children's children and so forth. Well, Richard, I want to say thank you very much for joining me today and sharing those amazing stories. And more importantly, really helping people understand the mindset of a warrior and what is the true science behind fighting and behind peace.
Murabai Yeshiba was the founder of Aikido, and Ki means love and harmony, and Ki means universal energy, and Do is the way of doing things. And so when you have love, even for the people, your enemies, you act differently than if you have hate. And it'll save your life if you keep from emoting anger or hate if you're in a fight or a gunfight, because you lose all your physiologic skills. You can't move. You have no fine motor skills. You get narrowed vision. A lot of things happen. But if you have love, even for the bad guys, and I truly do, those things don't happen. So it's not just a mindset, but it's a way of life that we're to love God and love our neighbor, even to love our enemy, which seems strange, but I absolutely do.
Well, thank you, Richard, for joining us. You guys, you can find richardmorris.com coming very soon. And Richard Morris Seminars, you can find out more about Richard. Richard, thank you again. It's been a distinct pleasure and honor to have you today.
Thank you. Right now I have richardmorristraining.com and richardmorrisseminars.com. They can go to either one of those. And if I can do anything for any of you, but especially our first responders, let me know, and I will certainly do everything within my power to help.
Well, and that's the mission behind Ziglar Blue, right? That you and Tom.
That's right.
You and Tom Ziglar. So for those of you who are watching and don't know who Tom Ziglar is, he's the son of the late Ziglar. I mean, legacy in business. And
I was Zig's karate teacher.
And you were Zig's karate. It's unbelievable.
I'm Tom's karate teacher, Julie Ziglar's Norman's karate teacher, Kyle Wilson's karate teacher. A lot of celebrities, and generally they don't want to be mentioned, but it's interesting how a poor, skinny little kid could grow up and have the ability to have influence on so many people. It's just a terrific blessing.
Well, and it's funny because, we think about how we met, and, I just believe everybody comes into our life for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's the choices that we make and the relationships that we build and the connections that we foster. that make the difference in our lives moving forward. So again, thank you and Merry Christmas.
By the way, Merry Christmas, but Jim Cathcart has it right. Relationship selling, everything's relationships. Even a fight's a relationship, just not a good one on one side. So we have to work on our relationships, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas, and may God be with you and all those watching.
Thank you.